I think that the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 is the most significant international document since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the reason I say that is, if it were fully implemented in its intent, it would drastically change the politics of peace, politics of security. And I want to start by going back to having mentioned earlier the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court was an idea that had been around for a long time. It was not an idea that was around in government ministries, Department of State, or anything like that. It was people who considered themselves world citizens, as people referred to themselves in those days. But there wasn't, the problem with that is there isn't any polity in which to be a citizen. But people had this concept of being a citizen of something beyond the nation state. Now, where that concept is actualized now is in something we call global civil society, which is the civil society movements and organizations, some of whom know nothing about the others, but all of whom are trying to improve the conditions of the community and the world as they see them. The International Criminal Court came about in that way, that there was a need that certain egregious violations of the international standards of war, laws of war and peace, and human rights standards, most especially genocide, had to be brought to justice. And you have the International Criminal Court. But there also is another very significant factor in the statute of the court, and that is the gender factor, that certain crimes that were considered just a tragedy of war, will always happen, were now recognized that these are crimes, and they should be prosecuted. Now, that was done by a group called the Gender Caucus. And the Gender Caucus was a civil society group working in and around the UN, and one of the most brilliant women who ever breathed on this planet, Rhonda Copeland, was the main energy behind that. And she had a way of looking at extant law and applying it to problems where it hadn't been applied before, such as making domestic violence punishable as torture, because she could prove that in the legal standards. So she was the one who saw the need to have this provision in the Rome Statute of the International Court. So that was one individual citizen working with other citizens in civil society. 1325 came out of the same kind of thing. We all have, I think, this is the problem with history. Those who were, there at the creation or whatever, well, you just talk to your siblings about what happened in your own family, and everybody has a different memory. But one thing we agree upon is that it was a civil society initiative. It came out of the Peace Caucus that operated in and around the UN, and the Peace Caucus always came into full force during the Commission on the Status of Women, because in spite of the fact that in 1975, they, meaning the nation states, member states, tried to argue that peace was not a woman's issue. Peace was a political issue, that women had nothing to do with it. Just be satisfied, ladies, with equality and development. We weren't satisfied. And the argument continued. So there was a precedent set by two special meetings of the Security Council, one on child soldiers and one on environment. Those were the first two that weren't about an immediate security crisis. Right? So I said, one of our group had a brilliant idea. Well, if Al Gore can get everybody to come in and discuss environment as a security issue, we can get women's perspectives and right to participate as a security issue if we really work at it. And so what we did as a group was to look at what are we up against. And I will say this, we were up against a lot, including women inside the system who said, don't rock the boat right now. They're not ready for this. It's a good idea, but they're not ready. And that's always the story. It's civil rights and everything. They're not ready yet. So, and as history unfolds, we know they aren't ready yet. But anyway, there were people in the system that would listen to us, wouldn't help us right away. But there were people in the missions, some people in delegations that came during the General Assembly, and there was a certain ambassador from Bangladesh. So with a number of member states, when we had to see who's coming up on the council, who's going to be president, when do we do this, finally we get sort of the package together. I can't remember exactly. There's a package that comes together, including UNIFEM. It's a little questionable when UNIFEM came on board, but they were the ones who came and presented at the Security Council. So it sort of becomes a UNIFEM initiative, which is the story of many, many of the good deeds that do not go unpunished. But what I want to emphasize is that civil society originated the idea, they prepared drafts and presented drafts. The final draft was vetted and vetted, but still it's very good. Not perfect by any means. And so, hooray, we've got it. But then, because it is now part of the UN system, it has to be put into practice by the member states. So the idea of having national plans of action came. Any place where you could the states can drag their feet on allowing the citizens what they demand, they will drag their feet. And so they're still dragging their feet. There are a number of very good national plans, and I am not aware of the monitoring. I haven't followed the monitoring, but I know that nothing is what we had hoped for, except that people are women are beginning to know about this. More people know about that 1325 than any other UN Security Council resolution. Maybe the ones on Israel, days past and so forth. But anybody who knows anything about the UN knows 1325. So there are a number of NGOs that are working to bring 1325 into force.